I've got a couple things to say. I was watching YouTube this morning and I've been seeing a lot of titles on YouTube videos talking about, a wasted generation with the PS5. Just a lot of complaining about our current state of gaming. And I'm not making this video because I disagree, per se, on people's remarks. I actually agree on a lot of things. But I think I'm also I kind of want to put my own perspective on certain things because it got me thinking about this generation of consoles and video games in general. We're currently in a weird space when it comes to video games right now. I say weird because it's not particularly bad. There are definitely a lot of cons being in this gaming cycle, but I also feel like we're in a good situation where we have a lot of advantages that we didn't really have in the past, and I think I kind of want to dive into that. But let's start with the premise of the PS5 being a wasted generation. I have a PS5. I got one actually not at launch, about like 2 years after it came out, so about now almost 3 years ago. Yeah, I don't really have, I don't know exactly what to say about it. I do think it is a great way to play. I think this is the most I've ever played with the Sony console. Just for context, if you probably watched any of my other videos, you've seen I do a lot of Nintendo content. Mostly because I think it's a lot of great topics to talk about and a lot of good games, and it's a good way to structure a lot of my videos. But the other reason is that I wholeheartedly grew up as a Nintendo gamer. I mean, as a kid, my first console was the Nintendo 64. And then after that, my brother got a GameCube, which, it then became my GameCube. And then my first real console that was bought for me was a Wii. And obviously all the Nintendo handhelds that have come through that time and whatnot. But I really wasn't exposed to PlayStation or Xbox or, Sega and Dreamcast until either I played it at a cousin's house or I played it with other family, or I would get like a secondhand version for free that my dad, would find like for either super cheap at like a flea market or whatever, and bring it home with, a handful of like random games. But other than that, really, I didn't like fully experience the entirety of like certain consoles' lives. So, that includes like I said, the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, Xbox 360. And it wasn't really until I got into college where I had my own money that I started to dive into those consoles and revisit a lot of these libraries and whatnot. I actually, ironically enough, am messing around with an Xbox 360, and that might be part of a future video. I'm not entirely sure yet, but I digress. Going back to why I say all of this is that I always grew up kind of isolated from these experiences, but I've always been around other people experiencing them, if that makes sense. Like as a PlayStation, I specifically remember the PS2 and Xbox generations, and then the PS3 and Xbox 360 generations, because those were the two that were present when I was a kid and actively gaming. And during those generations, like I said, I had my GameCube and my Wii, so I had my own perspectives on those two consoles. Whereas I had a lot of family members that either just had a PS2 or just had an Xbox or just had an Xbox 360, and then so on and so forth. And everybody would cling on really nostalgically to these consoles. I remember one of my cousins, he owned an Xbox 360, and he was one of the first cousins in the family that had an Xbox 360. It was one of the black Xbox fat consoles. And luckily his didn't get the red ring of death, which was awesome. But I remember always coming over and like playing, Black Ops and Modern Warfare 2 and split screen, or like the FIFA titles like FIFA 09 and things like that. It was always like the cross-gen games that you would get for both the PS3 and the Xbox. But regardless, yeah, so I've had all of these perspectives and I want to dive back into them. And I think the older that we get, every single time a new generation passes on, we look back on it with rose-colored glasses. In all honesty, each generation had its own problem. I'm going to talk about some pros of our generation today, and then I'll dive into more of these like personal anecdotes here. A lot of pros that we have today is, even though these companies are becoming increasingly not consumer friendly, I do believe that they have been, we have the most access to games ever, and I think that is for many reasons, not so much the current gaming landscape, but I think it's a compounding effect in the sense that, we have generations worth of games that we've either saved and now to a certain extent been able to transfer on from a previous library into our current library. I'm very thankful for the backwards compatibility that every single console have been adopting, because I think that is a great thing for gaming in general. Say what you will about Game Pass and the PlayStation extras and whatever. Say what you will about those, it is incredible value. I mean, you have hundreds and hundreds of games at your disposal for usually less than $20 a month. And I think that's really, really cool. And then you add on certain things like, PC gaming, shmemulation. That could be a whole different topic on its own, but I'm going to include it here because I think most gamers that have extensive libraries have either at one point or are continuing to do so, they are shmemulating with shmemulators. So all of that being said, we have a lot of access to content in general, and I think it's a double-edged sword, but it's more often than not good than it is negative for us at the moment. And not only that, I think for a lot of enthusiasts, especially guys my age or in their 20s, that have their own money, that they want to spend the money that they can to these things, there's a lot of different ways that you can just get a lot of games and a lot of content for not that much money. Yes, we know that there are $70, $80 games, but I think I've always been in the position to be able to like add to my backlog, or just go to local privately owned video game stores and get great deals on older games or used games, or even Facebook Marketplace. And not to say that none of that existed, let's say in 2002 or 2005. It did, but it didn't exist with the same amount of, like I said, content or games that were available at prices that would make sense during that period of time. A perfect example of that is I just got 12 games on Steam on their sale for less than $50. The average price for those games were $2 to $3. I mean, it's unheard of to be able to get something like that for a modern console, really any point other than maybe 10 years ago. So this compounding effect of being able to actually get great content, great games for reasonable prices and really good quality, I would say most every single console can play within 4K, especially now with the Switch 2. Yes, we know the Switch 2 is expensive and the games are expensive too, but I think the added benefit of that is a lot of the backwards compatibility. I won't dive into it. If you've seen my Switch 2 videos, you know what I'm talking about. But like I said, in general, the amount of content that we get that we can either play in 4K or at least 1080p at 60 FPS is incredible. We've never had as many games that played in the state that they do ever in history, right? So these are all the good things. So why are people complaining so much about PS5 being a wasted generation, or all of these negligible differences between the PS5 and PS4 generation, or the Xbox Series and Xbox One X generations, all of these things? And I think it's because of the notion of first-party games. I'm going to use the PS5 as an example, and I got to look this up because I want to be precise. So I've got a list of PS5 games versus PS3 or PS4 game. When you put the list side by side, it's not that bad, but you'll notice a theme here. So with the PS4 from 2013 to 2017, these are the first 4 years of the console. I'm using this as an example because I don't really think that there has been a PS5 exclusive that's released this year. I'm going to double check that. But from 2013 to 2017, PS4 released Knack, Killzone Shadowfall, Drive Club, Infamous Second Son / First Light, Bloodborne, Until Dawn, Orders 1886, Ratchet & Clank, Gravity Rush 2, Horizon Zero Dawn, Uncharted 4, Gran Turismo Sport, Knack 2, The Last Guardian, Shadow of the Beast, and we are not including, obviously, any of the God of War games because that came out in 2018. For PS5, in the first 4 years, they released Demon's Souls, Pacific Drive, Spider-Man 2, Stellar Blade, Astro's Playroom, Returnal, Rise of the Ronin, Destruction All-Stars, Final Fantasy 16, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, Helldivers 2, and Final Fantasy 7 Rebirth. And then Astrobot obviously came in later last year. So in terms of first-party games, it isn't that far off. And if you realize, from 2017 to 2020, that's when Sony released really a lot of their most successful first-party games. They released Spider-Man Miles Morales. They released God of War. They released, obviously, all of the sequels to that. They released really, really good AAA titles towards the latter half of the franchise, of the title. PS5 hasn't really done that. At least it hasn't gotten there yet, right? This would be the period of time where they would start to put out those crazy AAA games. And I think it's, there's several reasons. Like, Sony wanted to dive fully into the multiplayer, like Fortnite level type of experiences. And they've had about 8 games canceled during that period of time, which is pretty bad. Having 8 games scrapped because they just couldn't make it. Oh, by the way, Returnal was another one. Yeah, it's just there were just so many games that people overlooked. And I think it's also, you also have to put this again into perspective. These big libraries of games, and they didn't really come into fruition until around 2014, 2015. Most of the people who were playing up until that point, or at least 10 years before 2015, were playing in the old school mentality, having, a couple physical games, unless you were a collector, sticking to one console, and just doing that, right? Whereas after 2015, gaming as a medium really exploded. A lot of these third-party publishers were releasing fantastic cross-gen games. Things like the entire Souls-like games that they were releasing after Dark Souls 3, the Doom games. Really, a lot of these awesome experiences that you can play really with any kind of console, and people started to dive more into getting multiple consoles and diving into PC gaming and getting these giant backlogs of games. But that's been a very recent thing. I mean, you guys can tell me if I'm wrong in the comments or if you've had a different experience, but I think the general public really didn't get into gaming as like a general, like, popular medium until around like 2015. And then in 2016, 2017, that's when Fortnite came out and really it blew everything out of the water. You had a lot of these amazing free-to-play games that, were AAA experiences that had never existed before. Just so like, and again, people attribute that to that PS4, Xbox One generation, because that's when it first started to come out. That's when Game Pass started to exist, right, and become popular. That's when a lot of PC manufacturers and PC gaming really blew up, because of Fortnite also, but because of a lot of really cheap and fun games that you can get on Steam that you wouldn't be able to get anywhere else, like PUBG or H1Z1 or Minecraft. Really, yes, Minecraft was on console, but Minecraft was made for the PC. And then you got into, a lot of emulation, shmemulation, a lot of things. I know I'm kind of diving all over the place. I swear to you, I'm going to be able to make a point here. But, the PS5 generation, I think we're viewing it in a different lens at the moment, because we are in an unprecedented point. I think we're coming from a generation with the PS4 and Xbox generation that really opened the door to a lot of new things within the culture and the landscape of gaming. Things we never experienced before. Now, I'm going to provide the context that I was talking about earlier with having these previous consoles. I know for a lot of people, when they were growing up, at least a good percentage of the population, they either had one console if they were a gamer, and they didn't really have a lot of money to really play other kind of games outside of their console, or buy a lot of games and do all of that. I was one of those people. Like I said, I always had these hand-me-down consoles, and then my parents got the Wii because, one, it was the cheapest console you can buy at the time, comparatively speaking, and I already could play games on it with my GameCube games, so it made a lot of sense for them to just spend about $100 and some change to get the console for me, because I think the Wii at the time was like $99 when they bought it. But I didn't really have a lot of Wii games. I think I had Wii Sports, which came as a packet title. I had New Super Mario Brothers for the Wii. I had Mario Galaxy 1. I was able to get gifted Mario Galaxy 2 from a buddy of mine that just didn't use it anymore. I had the Metroid Prime Trilogy game, also given to me by a buddy of mine. And then I had Brawl. And that was it. A lot of the other games that I had either played or done or completed at the time, I would either rent out through Blockbuster or, Netflix, when eventually Netflix was starting to do that, and then Redbox when they started to do that. But that was it. There was no, like online console sales. There was no building a backlog. I didn't have a car or anything to just go to my local GameStop every now and again to look at the used games. But even then, the used games, unless they were like, the player selects games, they never went under $20. I think most of the library that I have on Steam and on my PS5, and on my Switch are either used games or games that I got severely discounted. So I know I'm rambling about a lot of different things, but I think that's as a whole, providing a lot of context that isn't really presented in most other people's conversations about the PS5 generation or the current generation, about it being wasted or all of that. I think that it's a little skewed. I think we're at the precipice of an evolution of gaming. I think we're just continuing what we've been really experiencing personally for the past 5 years, like I said, from 2015 onward. But when you compare it to generations in the past, it's kind of hard to complain. We have a lot at our disposal, a lot of fun free games. Let me dive into some of the things that I do wish we could have as a generation. I do understand the sentiment that, the first party game things are dying. And when I talked about if you see a trend on the PS5 exclusive games, it's because all of those PS5 games, maybe except for Demon's Souls and some other ones like Pacific Drive or whatever, they're also PC games now. So if you have a PC, you can play all of those PlayStation games. That none of those PlayStation 4 games that we talked about are on PC. You can't get Knack on PC. You can't get Bloodborne. You can't get the Ratchet and Clank PS4 game. You can't get Gravity Rush 2, Uncharted. You can't get any of those games. Last Guardian, Eno, whatever. You can't get any of those games on PS4. Or sorry, you can't get any of those games on PC. You know what I mean? So there's just a lot more options now, and I think they're realizing with the change in landscape of gaming where people have their hands really anywhere. I think they just want to be able to sell these consoles, or sorry, sell these games. I think they make more margins on the games than they do the console, which is why they sell the console to begin with, because they want to be able to make more money on third parties publishing on their platforms. But they also want to make more money on the games. If they have more consoles, they can sell more first-party games, which have huge profit margins on them. But now it's different. It wasn't like it was 10, 15 years ago. Nobody just has a PS4. You know, nobody just has a PS3 or like an Xbox 360. Most people have a Switch, a PC, and then either an Xbox Series or a PS5. Not everybody, right? Some very casual people might just have one, but that's the other thing. They want to catch that casual audience. So what are some things that I do want for this generation? I do wish this generation would stop focus on like trying to provide these crazy blockbuster experiences and go back to very unique, great games. I think something that Sony was able to do before Jim Ryan passed the torch was they finished the PS4 console with these awesome single-player experiences. The game that I forgot about earlier, Ghost of Tsushima, that's a great game, a single-player experience. God of War and Ragnarok, great games, single-player experiences. But all of the Sony Spider-Man games are great games, and they're all single-player experiences. And they wanted to dive into this multiplayer, whatever. I feel like if they were to just concentrate a little bit more on these like stories, and then maybe building out a multiplayer. I mean, we've had that exist before. All of the Xbox 360 and early PS4 Call of Duty games were like that. It had a great campaign for like original Black Ops and Modern Warfare 2, like a good 9-hour, 10-hour campaign or whatever. And then a awesome, robust online mode. You know, what happened to that? Why can't that exist anymore? Like, there's no reason it can't. It just doesn't. And yes, the current Modern Warfare games or the current Call of Duty games have that, but it's not the same. And if you played those, you know that it's not the same. Yes, some of the stories are good. Modern Warfare 2019 is a good story, is a good campaign. You know, Cold War was okay. But why can't that be a mainstay anymore for these games, you know? And you don't have to have these blockbuster games be every single release. You can release, look at Astrobot. You know, that was an amazing game, and I'm not entirely sure it was an extremely expensive game. But it was one of the I think it won Game of the Year, if I remember correctly. You know, why can't those experiences come out more frequently? You know, whatever happened to Sly Cooper, or, you know, yes, we have Ratchet and Clank, but there were so many different, Jak and Daxter, all of those kind of games that, you know, were great. Yes, cartoony, but who cares? It's still a good game. We don't have these unique experiences anymore. And I think we are at the precipice, like I said earlier, of this change of gaming landscape, where I think the need of the consumer will be met. We just are gonna take some time to get there. I know I've talked a lot about Sony, and unfortunately with this generation, they've really been the only like difference maker, so to speak. Xbox have been dragging their feet with their first party games, and any first party game, they just release it wherever they want. They've just become, just a massive publisher at this point, like an EA that has their own box, if you want to buy it. And not to say that the Series X is a bad console. I think, like I said, the performance is great, and its UI components are great. It's open. Its ability to be modded with the developer tools is really cool to me. I think that Microsoft could have shut that down a long time ago, but I think they actively choose not to. So it's a great method for anybody who wants to learn how to develop games to just pick up an Xbox game or Series console and develop for the console. Or shit, if you want to develop apps like emulators or whatever, since it is a Windows-based console, you can essentially easily do it with your laptop and have it run through the Xbox without having to do major modifications to it. In that sense, it's really cool. But again, there's not a lot of this first-party focus anymore. And I think that goes to the core of a lot of people's complaint. There's no identity within gaming anymore. And even with Nintendo, who strives to be the most different, releasing their hardware cycles completely different times and years apart from when Sony and Microsoft do it, making these incredible first-party games that they hold on for dear life to never sell on another console, and they're extremely litigious because they want to keep their IPs as profitable as possible. But even them, they are innovative, but unless they start releasing these really crazy experiences that we know that they can make, I think the perception of them of being the unique gaming console will slowly start to fade away. And I think it slowly already has, even with the Switch 2 launch, because the Switch 2, even though it's still a very incredible console for what it is, a powerful handheld device that can play these games in 1080p or 4K when you have it on the TV. If you told me that even 5 years ago, I would have been amazed. But we're so used to, them compromising the fidelity of games for their own uniqueness. Every single console has been severely underpowered, but they compromise that with amazing first-party games that are usually very innovative, or groundbreaking. And Nintendo, the first Nintendo Switch, really made its mark by releasing Breath of the Wild and showcasing, hey, we have this home console-like quality for our games in a handheld device. That's the first game that they launched with. Whereas the release for the Nintendo Switch 2 was Mario Kart World. Yes, a great game, a beautiful game, but it doesn't change the landscape of gaming like Breath of the Wild did. And I think people are noticing that. I love the direction they're going with, like animating the game models to be a lot more fun and cartoony and very interesting. It's noticeable, like I said, with starting with Super Mario Wonder, and then with all the incredible changes that they made with the game models in Mario Kart World, and now with Donkey Kong Bonanza looking like it's going to be a game changer and really fun and animated kind of game. I wish they should keep that identity of fun and wacky, but do something where it says, wow, we're making an impact on the landscape of gaming, and this should be the reason why you should buy the Nintendo Switch console. Not just because you can play all of your other games in a better format. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's one of the main reasons why I bought the Nintendo Switch 2, but it shouldn't have been the main reason why I bought a Nintendo Switch 2. So, all of that being said, where are we within the landscape of gaming? I'm not entirely sure. And to be honest, I don't think anybody's really going to have a full perspective on it until this generation's over with the PS6. But I do wish that, one, Sony releases great games to finish off the life cycle of the PS5. If Xbox is going to continue on this publishing route that they've been going on, you have so many studios. Keep publishing games. Just keep churning out games. People are going to buy them. You guys have great IPs, great franchises, great developers. Stop waiting around and pump out these games. You have the resources, you have the money. And for Nintendo is make something that's going to change our mind on the Switch 2. Stop letting people use price as an excuse to not buy the console, because it's a good console. But give people a reason to buy it. And when we compare it to where we were at before this generation, I think we are at the best generation for gaming enthusiasts, but it might not be the best for the casual person that wants a reason to go out and buy a new console to replace their current one. Because let's be honest, all of the current consoles are just upgrades, iPhone XR to iPhone 12 like upgrades to the previous console. So if your console and your Xbox One X still works, your PS4 Pro still works, your Nintendo Switch OLED still works, and you aren't planning on buying any new games, why the heck will you buy a new console? And I think that goes to the core argument against this current generation, and I hope it changes for the good of gaming. I think it's important to be able to have these great experiences that consumers would want to invest in, these game-changing experiences. We have the technology, we have the money within the industry, we have the talent. We just have to take that next step. And I'm not sure if this step will happen during this generation or if the next generation will start that step. I don't really know. But what I do know is I'm pretty happy about being a gamer right now in this landscape. I'm happy that we have all of these games to choose from. I am worried about the future, and I hope that the next generation or the next era of gaming happens sooner rather than later.
If you like this conversation, please like, comment, and subscribe for more content like this. I also have other videos on my top 10 Nintendo 64 games, top 10 GameCube games, and a couple videos on my Switch 2. Thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.